Okay, well, greetings everyone. My name is Ray Smith. I'm the Associate Dean for Executive Education at the Darla School of Business. Welcome to the 7th in our series of Managerial Insights. These insights were brought together from the Darla School and the faculty we work with in Executive Education in order to talk about ideas and insights from research, from experience, from our faculty's knowledge in their particular fields to bring to your world in this rather difficult time. So today I'd like to welcome Lynn McFarland. She will be with us today, and she'll be talking about leadership in a time of crisis, an absolutely crucial topic. And Lynn is a member of our faculty, does a lot of our leadership courses and such things. And she will be talking about the difference between leading in this time and leading in a normal time, and how a leader should behave in order to maintain the momentum that they generally create. This is a collaboration between South Carolina Business Review and Mike Switzer, who unfortunately can't be with us today. So Mike would normally ask questions at the end of Lynn's presentation. I'll be taking his place on this occasion. I should also say that this program is recorded. It will be available about a day or so after this. We have to get subtitles and such things on before we can post it on our website. As soon as that's there, it's there for you to review again, to share with your colleagues and friends, and please do that. The other thing I'd like to say is that there will be a question and answer, as I've just referred to, when Lynn finishes. If you want to ask a question, please do. There's a chat function at the bottom of the screen. If you take your cursor to the bottom of your screen, you'll see chat function there. Type your question in there. That will be, I will see that, and then I'll ask your question to Lynn as we go through, and Lynn will ask them. The more questions we get, the better. Lynn will also have some PowerPoints. Those PowerPoints will be available immediately we finish, again, so that you can share them. I hope you'll find this session interesting, informative, and I will be quiet now, and I'm going to hand over to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate that. As Ray said, I teach a leadership course here through the executive education, and I also teach in the management department at both the undergrad and the graduate level. I teach principles of management. I teach MHR students how to develop leaders. And just to give you a little bit of my background, because it really applies to how I perceive leadership, I'm actually have a doctorate in psychology. So I started out my professional career as a professor in a psychology department. I was there a few years, and then I left to start an HR consulting firm. So I was the president and founder of a firm that helped organizations develop employees and select the right employees for jobs, things like that. And then I came back to the academic realm in 2014 when I joined the management department here. And I've loved it here ever since. I don't ever want to leave. But I tell you all that because one of the things that I've learned is I learned about leadership from the academic side, but then I also saw it for 10 years, right? And what the leadership theory says is that it really doesn't matter what environment you're leading in. There are these core behaviors and characteristics that really generalize across the board. And I got to see that. I got to see that whether you were talking about a nonprofit or a for-profit agency, or you were talking about the fire chief for a small city, or a CHRO for a Fortune 500 company, it really seemed like the same ingredients were necessary for effective leadership. And so, you know, I didn't invent anything there, but it was really profound to see that the theory really was right. I mean, it really doesn't matter what role you're actually in. There are these key ingredients. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to talk briefly about some of those key ingredients for effective leadership. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about the ones at the core. Then I'll talk about a little bit what's unique about leading during a time of crisis. And certainly this applies in the time of the COVID crisis, but it would also apply, if there's some kind of dramatic effect internally within the company or outside. And then I'll give you some guidance for how do you ensure that your leader effectiveness doesn't suffer as a result of the crisis. How do you lead through a crisis and come out the other side intact, right? Essentially. And so in keeping with my background, I really view leadership as a relationship. I mean, that's what it comes down to. When you're in a relationship, you ask yourself either explicitly or implicitly some key things, right? You say, do I see this person as credible? Are they dedicated to me? Do I really see who they really are? And hopefully the answer there is yes. The second thing you might ask is, can I trust this person, right? I mean, do they understand me? Do they behave consistently? Do they behave in ways that I can predict, right? And then the third thing is, do I feel included? Does this person make me feel a part of the community? And so you would hope that, if you answer yes to all three of those, you're in a good relationship, right? And the same thing goes for leadership. And even if we don't know our leader personally, right? If the CEO, maybe I've never even met the person, I guarantee you that every single person in the organization has an answer to those three questions, right? And that determines how effective this leader is operating. Whether or not they see the individual as credible, trustworthy, and they're feeling this sense of community. And so I just want to briefly, I'm going to spend less than 5 minutes on this, but I want to talk a little bit about what are the things that go into determining whether or not you perceive a leader as credible, trustworthy, or creating this sense of community, because I think they're important for some of the advice I'm going to give later. And basically, you're likely to perceive a leader as credible when you feel like you're seeing that person's true self, right? They are authentic. You're also likely to see a leader as credible when you feel like they're dedicated to the team, that they really will live or die with that team. They're not going to leave you on the sidelines if you fail. And the third thing, which a lot of leaders struggle with, is vision. And so this includes two parts. One is, as a leader, does the leader see the future? And do they, or at least what they see the future as being, and then can they articulate it to those around them and get people excited about the direction that they want to go? Because remember, when I talk about leadership, I'm not talking about formal authority. Leadership is really about your ability to influence others, right? To guide them through convincing them, essentially. And so you've got to be able to do vision well. You've got to have both parts, be able to see it and then also be able to communicate it. The other part, the second dimension, which I talked about, is trust, right? And you tend to trust a leader when that leader demonstrates that they have concern for you, they understand you. When they behave consistently, you're more likely to trust them, right? Because you can predict what they're going to do. And consistency goes hand in hand with fairness. So do they treat you consistently, but then also, are they treating everyone in the same way? Do the same rules apply? Do you understand why they make the decisions that they make? And if you consistently do that as a leader, then you get trust. And then the last one is that community. And this is really helping those in your group to focus on what their task is, right? Making it clear, this is what I expect of you. And then the second part is fit. This is how you fit into the larger whole. This is how you contribute to the community, to the organization, whatever that group is. And then the last part is building this shared identity, meaning that the people on the team, when the team wins, everybody feels it. They feel that win. They celebrate that win. But also when that team loses, they all can mourn that loss, right? So they really have that shared sense of we win and lose as a team. And when you have that, that's a powerful thing. That's something that it becomes much more easy to adapt to change when you have that sense of community, because you're all in this together, right? And you can probably see that these fit, right? If you see your leader as not credible, you don't trust them, you're unlikely to create this sense of community, right? These pieces fit like a puzzle where if one of them's missing, the other ones really don't make sense. So keep that in mind too, that damage to one of these areas could actually affect the others, even if they're not directly impacted. So how does a crisis change leadership? Well, in some ways it doesn't change much, right? These three things still matter. You still have to be credible. You still have to be trustworthy. You still have to create a sense of community. If anything, those things become even more important, right? Because you need that to be able to adapt quickly to the situation. If you don't have the trust of the people that you work with, it's going to be really difficult for them to follow your lead in a time of crisis, right? So these are crucial. Even more so in the COVID years, you know. Also, leaders are less likely to get the benefit of the doubt when situations are scary and ambiguous, or there's some kind of pressure. And now, what I don't mean here, I don't want this to be misinterpreted. I'm not saying you can't make a mistake. Actually, people are really forgiving of mistakes. What I'm saying here is that if you behave in ways that are inconsistent with the values that you've touted for before the crisis, if you behave in ways that are inconsistent with that, people will immediately assume you've been faking it, essentially, right? And I'll give you an example, because this is an important point, because I'm not saying that you can't make errors. I'm saying you have to be true to your values. And when I worked in the mall as an undergraduate, worked in a retail store. And when I was hired, my manager made such a stink about how the customer was our friend. And he gave us the book we had to read. It was a corporation. And so it was the corporation book, but he said, this is what I value. This is like my Bible. I mean, he made such a big deal about this. And I read the whole book like he asked, and he was right. It talked about that the customer's a friend. So when they come in the store, you would help them like you would a friend. And I always thought he was over the top. I honestly thought it was a little odd, but I did believe that he believed that. And so it made it a little more tolerable. But we had one incident where we had this big inventory to do, and his bosses were on him about it. And we really needed to get it done. And I can remember I was working on the inventory, and a customer came in, and I did what he told me I always had to do, which was drop everything and help the customer. So I did exactly what he had taught. And after the customer left, he flipped out and said, I absolutely should not have dropped the inventory, that we needed to get that done, and the customer could have found their own sweater. And at that point, he lost me, because I thought, wow, the instant you're a little bit stressed out, all of your values went out the window. The thing you told me that you value more than anything no longer matters. And from that point on, it really became intolerable when he would lecture me about the customer, because I knew it wasn't really what he believed. It was what he felt like the company required him to tell us. And it became much less useful, right? I didn't listen because I knew he didn't actually believe it. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind. Be true to your values. Don't switch because you're putting out the fires. Those things are still important, okay? And finally, you know, vision becomes really difficult when we're talking about a future that really maybe none of us can see, right? If you're not an infectious disease expert, do you really have any sense of what it's going to be like in a month, in 6 months, in a year? Probably not, right? And so, but you still have to try to convey some vision, but you have to also balance that with the fact that, hey, this might have to change in the future, but this is where I see things going. But it's actually absolutely crucial for you to communicate that the vision that you're presenting is based on what the experts, the information that the experts are giving you, right? Because nobody expects you to know everything. In fact, they'll be relieved to know you're not just relying on your own instincts when it's something you honestly might not know anything about, right? So keep in mind, you're not exempt from showing vision just because nobody knows what the future holds. There are ways to do that even in times of uncertainty, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Okay, so that's how leadership is different. Now let's talk about specifically the credibility, trust, and sense of community, and what a leader can do that's especially important in a time of crisis. So the first thing is the credibility, right? So how do you make sure you don't lose the credibility, which is all about being authentic, showing your dedication to the team, and conveying the vision, right? So the first thing is to be visible. Before anything else, you just need to be present. Now, that seems like it could be easy in most crises, but actually in the current one, this is difficult, right? Because visible doesn't mean present in the same room. In fact, it can't. So by visible, it means reach out as many ways as you can. Be accessible, right? Make sure you're emailing those that you work with, updating them. You want to make sure that they know you're present, okay? The other thing is to stay calm. Just if you're running around and freaking out, that doesn't help anyone, right? That's not good. A great example of this, which is, you know, world renowned, you'll hear about this as an example of staying calm, and it's when President George W. Bush heard about the twin towers, right? The terrorist attacks on 9/11, and he like stayed completely stone-faced while his advisor in this picture told him about the incident. And at the time, I think he was reading to kids, or so, he was at a school, and he continued what he was doing. He left a little bit early, but he stayed completely calm. And people say that was an excellent response because he didn't know the situation really. They weren't sure it was a terrorist attack. They didn't know what caused it. It was an unknown. So the best thing he could have done in that case is to not react, to stay calm and process and get more information. On the flip side of that, you also have to show appropriate emotion, right? And another President Barack Obama did just that when those first grade kids were shot in the school in Connecticut, right? I mean, it was a horrible thing. And again, people said, you know, that was the appropriate thing to do. He actually started to cry when he was talking about them. And showing appropriate emotion is not a weakness. It actually can be a really powerful thing because it demonstrates how dedicated you are to the team, how much you care, how you're in it with them, right? The fact that he cried about these kids that he didn't know really just made us all feel like, oh, okay, yeah, we're in this together. He got a credibility that you can't fake. So it's okay to show emotion if you're worried or, you know, you're sad, especially with the pandemic. There's a range of emotions, right? People are scared about their jobs, but they're also worried about their family. They may have lost a loved one. It's okay to show the emotion that you feel. You don't want to run around and act like you don't know what's going on, but it's okay to mourn when you're mourning. It's okay to show that you're upset when you're upset. The key is to show genuine emotion, right? You don't want to fake anything because it's going to show. People are going to know it. And again, you have to continue to provide vision, but the key is to demonstrate that you are educating yourself about what that vision is based on, right? If you just try to present a rosy view of the future, nobody's going to buy it. But if you actually say, this is what I've heard from the experts, based on this is what I envision happening. And you can say this might change, right? I think if you look at who has handled the pandemic best, many governors have come out as heroes. And if you watch those governors that have done the most exceptional job, they actually say they don't know all the time. I mean, they admit it all the time. It's actually a really great demonstration of leadership, because the leaders that are the most credible are saying, I don't know. This is what the experts have told me. If that comes out to be true, because a lot of times time has to tell, right? Then we'll do X, Y, Z. If that doesn't happen, we'll do A, B, C. And they have the contingencies. It's okay to have a vision with the contingencies during a time of crisis. In fact, it's reassuring, right? You want to know that your leaders are thinking through these issues and have contingency plans. So don't get caught up in the, I have to know everything. People are looking to me to be the expert. No, actually, if you can bring the experts to the people and explain what the experts are saying and what that might look like in the future based on the information, that's an incredible way to lead. That's a useful way to lead. Okay, the next one is trust, right? We talked about the fact that you have to be trustworthy. Well, in a time of a crisis, honesty, like always, is the best policy. It really is. Don't sugarcoat it, right? I always say that leadership they're like relationships. And a lot of time being a supervisor or a leader is like being a parent. But the key where it differs is that you're dealing with adults, right? So you don't sugarcoat it. That's the surest way to lose trust, is to just try to convince everyone it's going to be okay when you don't know it's all going to be okay. So you want to be honest. You also want to communicate immediately and as clearly as possible. And depending on the crisis, you may not even know what the situation is yet. You may not even have a clear picture in your own mind. You still want to reach out to make sure people know you are present, you are on top of it. This is related to being visible, right? To making sure people know you're handling it. So if the message is just, hey, I've heard about this. This is looking really scary and bad right now. I am collecting the information. As soon as I know what's happening, I will be in touch again. That's okay, but just reach out in some way and make sure your people are getting some kind of message to at least reassure them that even if you don't know what's happening yet, you will, and you will communicate it when you do. Also, communicate with everyone the same message through multiple channels. So one of the things I see leaders do is that they're so busy putting out the fires and just reacting that with each individual they talk with, they provide a different piece of information. All of it's true, but they're not providing the whole picture to everyone. And when those people then talk to each other, they start thinking, why am I not hearing all of the details? Why didn't I get told that? Then they start inventing things. They start making up things that aren't productive in any way, right? It's gossip, and when people act on gossip, bad things happen. So the best thing to do is to make sure that when you communicate, the message is sent to everyone, and it's as complete and as transparent as possible, and that they're all getting the same message, right? Through email, through maybe phone messages, through text, whatever way you communicate with your people, make sure they're getting the message in multiple ways. And it's a consistent message, right? Also, be transparent about how decisions are made. So you may not have all the answers, and it's okay, but you need to really communicate what processes are being used to try to develop the answers. People are okay with not knowing all of the details if they can trust the process. So be sure you're communicating at least how the decision making is happening, so that they're less scared, right? People just, when people are scared, they want information that reassures us. And so provide as much as you possibly can. Okay, and then the last dimension is the sense of community, right? And this is creating this shared identity among those that you're working with. So what do you do in a time of crisis that maybe is most important? The first thing is to speak to the team as a whole whenever possible. And this one may seem counterintuitive in some sense, especially since we're all working from home now. And you know, the last thing that most of us ever want are meetings, right? We always say, can't this just be an email? During crisis is the one time I would say, even though that's the time you may say we shouldn't have a meeting, that's actually when you need to have a meeting. And most people will agree. I mean, I can speak personally. I've had department meetings. My chair has said we're going to meet each week until now. It's the summer, so now we're going to meet each month. But for the spring term, we met every week as a department, virtually, of course, but we met. We never did that in the past, but she recognized, hey, this is really important that everyone feels like they're keyed in. They know what's happening, because we're all a little bit off our game, right? We all of a sudden are all teaching from home. It was a really wonderful thing to be able to see my colleagues, even just virtually, and share just what we were going through, or struggles we had, or best practices. So don't think because there's a crisis, well, we don't have time to meet. That's when you have to meet. That's when you have to make the time. Even if you don't have an agenda, it might just be to share, you know, your thoughts about things or feelings. I remember when I first started out, I taught at George Mason University in the psychology department there. And I was a second year faculty member, and 9/11 happened. And I was teaching a professional development class with a colleague. It was like a joint class. And that was in the afternoon on 9/11. And so obviously the planes crashed in the morning, right? And I remember the minute I got into my office, it was like 8:30. After I heard the news, the next thing was a phone call was from one of the doctoral students saying, you're going to cancel class, right? Because we can't have class. We have students in the Pentagon, and, you know, it's like, we're all stressed out. And I thought, yeah, absolutely, we shouldn't have class. You're right. And the mistake I made was I didn't check with my senior colleague. And when I spoke with her, she's like, oh, we're going to have class. We're going to pretend that nothing happened. And we're not going to let the terrorists win. We're going to teach class. And so clearly her and I were on different ends of the continuum, and we met for class and we had class, and it was really, you know, the worst class I've ever had. But, you know, in hindsight, we were both wrong. We were both absolutely wrong in that instance, because she wanted to pretend that nothing happened. And I wanted to pretend that, you know, we didn't have to talk about it. What we should have done in hindsight is met as a class, but just used it as an opportunity to share what the students were concerned about, how we might help them, if they, you know, if anyone had information that might be useful to other students. We really missed an opportunity to come together as a community. And so, you know, and it might have worked better had the other teacher and I talked first, right? And neither one of us really handled the situation well, because we were so taken off guard. But it was definitely a lesson that I look back on. People need to vent. People like to talk about things when they're in that uncertain time. And so don't forget that there is value in a meeting, even if there's really nothing directly that you can do at the time. It might be useful just to discuss what's happening and what people are concerned about. Also, as a leader, you want to use the team meetings as an opportunity to share how you might navigate the crisis, right? Again, sharing options is a useful strategy. You may not know exactly what the future looks like, but you can explain what's being done to try to get a handle on it. Also, set priorities for your team, right? You want to make sure that there are some people like my colleague who are going to try to do things that they've always done and not change. But that may not be the right way to proceed, right? It might be, and then you have others who may just kind of flounder because they don't have any idea what they're supposed to do, right? So you need to really sit down with your group and say, this is what my expectations are. Look, we're like in my case, right? We're teaching remotely now. What does that mean? What does that look like? Does that mean I just post my slides online and my students look through them and then take a test after they're done? You know, no, I actually need to teach the class either synchronously or at least post a lecture and make sure that my students have an opportunity to still learn from me and ask questions. I still have office hours, right? I still have to do things, but it looks very different than it normally would. So make sure as a leader, you're not assuming it's understood. You are really setting the priorities and explaining what it's going to look like in now and maybe in the future. Also, find out what your team is most concerned about, right? Like that in that example I gave, it would have been a great opportunity to meet with our students and find out what were they scared about, you know, in that point in time. And you should do that with your team too. That's why the weekly meeting or, you know, meeting on some regular basis is useful, because their concerns may change, right? At first, I think everyone's concern with the pandemic was health, right? You're concerned about, I don't want to get sick. I don't want my family to get sick. And then it changes a little bit and you start to think about, well, wait a minute, my job could be in jeopardy. And then your concerns change, right? Am I going to have my pay docked? Am I going to lose my job? And so you want to have your finger on the pulse to understand what is it my team is really concerned about. You may be surprised. I've read examples about how leaders have talked to their team and they assumed that their team was most concerned about losing their job. But in actuality, they were concerned about a certain portion of the organization that was the most the vulnerable group, you know. And so as a leader, you need to understand what are the concerns that they have, and you can't know that if you're not sitting down and speaking with them, right? That's the best way to get at that information. Also, explain what you're doing to protect the team. And this seems really self-serving, but it's actually good for your team, because if I am worried about my job and I'm afraid that, you know, I'm either going to lose my job or you may dock my pay or things like that, I want to know what my leader is doing to help make sure that the things that I'm most afraid of don't happen, right? And that's actually reassuring. So it not only helps to reassure your team when you explicitly explain, this is how I'm trying to protect my group, the organization, whoever the stakeholders are. But it also benefits you personally, because you're also conveying something that they may not be able to see, right? They don't see you having a conversation with your boss about how to best protect the team, or to make sure that they're not overworked or whatever they might be concerned about. So this is also an opportunity for you to reassure them, hey, I really am in your court, right? Oh, okay. So then I just want to give you, so those are the three areas, right? The credibility, the trust, and the sense of community. Those are just specific things I think that are essential in a time of crisis. There are a few other things I want to go over that are more general. One is, when you ask your advisors for advice, don't ask yes, no questions. Don't like come up with a solution and then have someone react to that. The research finds that when you, as a leader, when you ask yes, no questions, guess what? Most of the time people agree with you because they don't want to disagree with the leader, right? So the best thing to do is to ask the question in a way where you're not showing what you think the best strategy is. You might say, give me some options. Based on that, what do you think are the pros and cons of option A, option B, option C? You want to keep it really open so that your own views aren't going to cloud those around you, right? You want to avoid groupthink where people are just agreeing with you. Also, the next two are really tied. You need to stay true to your values, as I talked about, because remember, you're going to lead this team, hopefully after the crisis too. Right? So even though you may try to make excuses to yourself about why you have to behave in ways that are uncharacteristic, keep in mind, you know, again, this is a relationship. And if you break trust, you do things that make you look less than credible, those are hard things to earn back, right? You could think about that with a loved one or a friend where you've had a relationship and they've lost your trust. You don't want to behave in ways that make people around you doubt you, right? And when you think about leadership as a relationship, it becomes really easy to figure out what's appropriate and what's not, right? Because you start to go, wait a minute, if this was my sister or my spouse, I wouldn't lie about this, and so it sort of grounds you too when you think of it as a relationship, as opposed to I'm the leader and they're the subordinates. But the last thing is, you're going to make mistakes. All leaders do, and it's more likely to happen during a time of crisis. Absolutely, the best leaders have missteps. The big thing that distinguishes leaders that are effective from those that aren't is how they take the failure, right? It's okay to fail, but you want to see it as an opportunity to learn. You analyze it and then take what you can from that experience to try to ensure that doesn't happen again in the future. And then forgive yourself, right? And it's okay to explain to those around you too, like, oh, that didn't go well. I'm not going to make excuses, but I want you all to understand why that went wrong. And then kind of explaining where the thought process may have went awry, or what changed in the environment that made your actions, less than effective. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for sitting in. I really enjoyed this. I obviously enjoyed this material, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have, or also you can also contact me either through email or phone. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask me?
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. This is Ray Smith again. So just to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask a question of Lynn, please go to the chat function at the bottom of the screen, type in your question, and I will relay that to Lynn. So I have a few questions for you. Lynn, leaders often think about teams. So they lead, and you've been talking about leading the team. The team is also made up of individuals. And one of the things I've observed, this is a question for me, from the work we've been doing at the university, but also the work that other people I know who've been experiencing with their other organizations, completely different, is that many people are using Zoom, which is a team-based thing, so that's very good. And it's great for kind of the extroverts amongst us. But one of the things that I wonder about the introverts and those people who you would normally bump into on a daily business, how can you as a leader in a virtual environment keep in touch with the individuals and their needs and issues as well?
Yeah, well, I think that the introverts really benefit just as much being on a Zoom meeting. The key would be not to necessarily force them to be the center of attention, right? And to make sure that there are ways that they can communicate concerns to you in a private way if they're less comfortable doing it through Zoom, right? With everyone there. You can, the great thing about Zoom is though that you do have like the private chat function, right? So someone can even just send a message to you personally, even during the meeting. And so I think, but as a leader, you have to be clear that you're going to use the function and you would encourage that or things like that. But I would make sure not to lose sight of the introverts. I wouldn't let them off the hook and say, you don't have to come to the meeting, because I really do think even if they don't engage, just hearing everyone else talk is comforting. But make sure you do allow other ways for them to connect with you if those group settings can be, really stressful for folks that aren't as comfortable in that kind of environment. So whether that's a chat or a phone call, I would follow up with an individual that I thought got lost in the Zoom meeting, right? And they didn't say a word. I would probably give a phone call after or send an email. I've done that with students, like, hey, it looked like you had a question, but you didn't ask. So what's going on? Is there anything I can help with? It's important for you to stay keyed in, right, to the people, especially the ones you work closely with.
And another question to do with the members of the team. You've talked a lot about maintaining the vision and adjusting the vision during this time of crisis. How can the team assist within that process? What is their role?
Yeah. And so this is, I think the team, the first part, the way that they assist with the process is stating their concerns, right? Is to kind of explain what they're anxious about, because then I think the leader can help ensure that the vision that they have addresses those things. But the other part gets more complicated. I mean, there are times where you may want to ask the advice of the team, right? And say, like the example I gave during the radio call with Mike, I said, there are times where you may have the option, do we lay off employees or do we, dock pay, we do the furloughs. Employees might have ideas about how they want to handle that. And you might be surprised, right? A lot of people may say, I am absolutely willing to take a dock and pay if it means that everybody keeps their job. The only thing I would caution about asking for that kind of feedback is that when you ask for feedback, the assumption is you're going to use it. And when you don't, people take it personally, right? They get offended. They sort of go, why did you ask me if you weren't going to actually take my opinion into account? So I think you have to tread really carefully as a leader. I always will ask for the opinions, but then I will caution and say, assuming that we can control this, assuming, because there are other parties too, right? That have to be convinced or that have to rule on the ultimate decision. So I think it's all in the way you present it and say, I want to hear what you have to say, because you might think of things I never thought about, and I'm the one that's going to be negotiating with the powers that be. And then if you don't end up using the feedback, I think you need to explain why. Like you might say, hey, the environment changed. We had every intention of using the information you gave us, but X, Y, and Z changed on us, and then it became irrelevant. I think you do owe them an explanation.
Okay, I have a question from the audience. Says, hi, great session. Sharing information transparently with everyone was an important point that you've made. Is there information that should be limited to senior management?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is. There are going to be times when you can't share the information, right? I mean, there's like, might be a HIPAA violation, right? You can't explain that people are sick because you're not allowed to share it. And I would almost always err on the side of transparency unless it's really a legal violation of privacy. I will say though that when you have really, you have the credibility, the trust, and you have a sense of community, people are much more forgiving when you can't be transparent. It's like when I talked about that, people are more willing to be okay with the outcome when they trust the process. When people trust you, they see you as credible, they feel like you're all a part of the same community, you get more leverage, you get more wiggle room there. So at those times, I would be honest and say there are things I can't say because of whatever reasons, whether it's because your bosses are saying you can't share that happens at times, and you have to respect that. People are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, okay, if they really trust you. That's why those core, the credibility, the trust in the community are so crucial, because if you have those three things, it allows you to not be transparent all the time when you can't, and still get people to be okay with that, essentially. Does that make sense? Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think those are all the questions that I've had, unless one comes in any moment now, perhaps. Does it? Oh, yes. We have a question. There you are. What are your thoughts regarding the US work culture as a second family, staying late at the office, taking on added responsibility, employee loyalty and longevity, etc.? After a lot of organizations abandon their employees with the mass layoffs and furloughs, and then they will call people back to service in the coming months.
Yeah, in general, that's a loaded question there, because there's a few parts, right? Like I always tell leaders that they have to be an example of work and family balance by making sure they're spending time with their family. Like it's actually good to be a role model to demonstrate that I have a healthy life with my family, and I also have a healthy work life. And to do that, you need balance. So I wouldn't advocate, expecting all the time employees to stay late and do whatever it takes to get the job done. I'm not an advocate of that generally. But I will say that the organizations that I've seen handled this well, even when they've had to lay off people, they have helped them through the process. And the employees are incredibly favorable toward the employer that laid them off. Like people are remarkably understanding when you're treated with respect, right? So I would say that you can still do what you have to do as a company, but remember that you're dealing with people with lives and with families, and so treat them accordingly. It's not okay to say, look, we're in a crisis, I would just gotta let you go, and I'm not going to help you file for unemployment or things like that. No, you should be helping with that process. And long term, that will pay off, because people, that word gets around, right? When you treat people well, even in times when it's hard to, that comes back to you in a good way. And the opposite is true too. If you're going to just kind of let people go because you're like, look, it's times are tough, I don't have time for this, that's not going to serve you well in the long run. Did I answer that question, or you think there's another part to it that I missed?
I actually think you answered that question very well. And I imagine that's a question that might face a lot of leaders for layoffs and furloughs and such things, and then trying to bring people back again. So
Mm-hmm.
I can understand the importance of that question as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that helpful. Obviously, I can't answer that on behalf of the person that asked the question.
Yes.
But Lynn, thank you very much. I know a lot of effort goes into this. I know you've given a lot of your time freely to do this. I know also that if there are other questions, you've left your contact details and people can reach out to you and ask a question,
Yes.
and they will answer it. So I'd like to thank you very much for doing that. And
Thank you.
I'm going to say a few words now about our next speaker, who will be Professor Mark Ferguson. Mark Ferguson is an expert in supply chain. Now, that's a really interesting and important topic at the moment. And he will be talking about what we've learned about the supply chain, global supply chains in particular, and how we might want to think about building a sustainable supply chain in the future. Mark will be on Mike Switzer's show next Wednesday, and we'll be here in our Zoom call the following Monday. So I hope you found Lynn's session very interesting and informative and helpful to you as you go through this rather difficult time. And I hope we'll see you next Monday. Thank you for joining us.